All right, it's 8:30 p.m. It's Wednesday night. That means it's the live Panther-Lair Show, and we are here. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. It's the website right down there below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know the deal. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Sorry, I have to check every time our Rivals transfer portal Twitter account puts something out. I get a notification just to see what's going on and who it is. Now it's a San Diego State guy who's going into the draft and also entering the transfer portal, or at least checking his draft status and entering the transfer portal. I always have to look at that, not necessarily because I think it might be a Pitt guy going, but just because it might be Matthew Cleveland going, or it might be some Georgia Tech guy going, or someone from Virginia, or someone that we've seen Pitt play every year, Harlan Beverly. I mean, like, there's no limit to the guys that could end up in the transfer portal. It's almost remarkable. And somehow we're still surprised when we see like a Joe Girard or Jesse Edwards or a Matthew Cleveland go into the portal. We're still surprised by it, but we shouldn't be. And I imagine the surprise will wane year after year after year as we see more and more notable names going into the transfer portal. And I think it's more for basketball than it is for football. I mean, Jordan Addison transferring was a big one. And I think there have been other big ones. But basketball, I mean, it really feels like nothing is impossible. Anything is possible, as the poet Kevin Garnett was once paid to say. Anybody could go into the portal. I mean, there's really no limit to it. I mean, obviously there's no limit to it. It's the way the whole thing is designed. But I'm saying that no one is safe. No one is guaranteed to be on their roster next year. And I think coaches understand this. And they've taken this approach of, we can't count on anybody coming back. We can be pretty sure about guys coming back. We can be 99% sure about somebody coming back, but we can never really be 100% sure about anybody coming back until they start the fall semester. I guess until they suit up for a practice or a game. You never really know if anybody's coming back. You just don't know. It's just how it is right now. And we keep seeing prominent names going in, particularly from on the hoop side, and it's just remarkable. I mean, probably from the outside, people would look at John Hughley and say, like, I can't believe that guy's going into the portal. Now, we all followed it a little more closely and, followed the situation over the course of the last, 4 months or whatever it's been, 3 months. But it's truly remarkable, the guys that will end up in the transfer portal. And it's, players you expect and players you don't. It's not all just like scrubs and bench guys trying to, find a better opportunity. It's top guys going to find a better opportunity. Anywho, you know the deal. Is Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting, all right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Everything you need to know about Pitt sports is right there on the website, and of course, message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. is the website. And, the message boards have been buzzing, as always, through spring camp and the transfer period and all the recruiting stuff that's been happening on the football side with all the commitments they got in March, getting that recruiting class up to 10. And, of course, Jeff Capel's efforts now in the transfer portal to try to land guys who can help the roster this coming season. They got one this week, and that had the message boards going. Got a good chance of landing someone, I think, this coming weekend, and that's got the message boards going. And it's just... there's always something to talk about in this time of year. I'm still waiting for that, when that lull comes. I'm not really sure when the lull comes. Maybe July, I guess, because the transfer portal is doing a lot of work right now of keeping things interesting. Spring football is doing a lot of work of keeping things interesting. Football recruiting is going to go at a pretty high speed between now and the end of June. It'll slow down a little bit when we get to July, but not anytime soon. You still got a solid 2.5 months of football recruiting happening at a pretty high pace. There's always something to talk about. And worst comes to worst, there's always stadium talk. You can always get into talk about whether or not Pitt's going to build a new stadium. That's actually for tomorrow's morning Pitt video, which you can get right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. For tomorrow's morning Pitt video, we're doing a mailbag, and one of the questions is about a stadium. What have you really heard about a football stadium? And I had some thoughts. And opinions. I mean, we can get into it tonight if you want, or you can just wait and watch the morning Pitt. Speaking of, you got to make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'd appreciate that very much. The like button's down there. I think you can see it. The subscribe button is right there. Click that thing, and then if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, once you subscribe, you can turn on notifications. You get those notifications on, and you'll get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live, or every time we post a new video, or anytime we do anything here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You won't miss any of it. So subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're here tonight. We would appreciate it. Got people filing in, and questions are still starting to fill up. There's plenty to discuss. If you want to join the conversation, it's right there on the right-hand side. My screen is reversed, so I have to raise my left hand to show you the right hand. But it's right there on the right-hand side of the screen. You can post your comment or your question there. That chat screen starts to fill up as we move through the show, and so there's sometimes we miss some of the comments or questions. We try to get to as many of them as we can. If you want to make sure your comment gets read, your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter. Click the little dollar sign down at the bottom of the chat screen. Kick a couple bucks to the podcast. We appreciate the support, and we'll make sure we answer your question or respond to your comment, as ridiculous as it may be. If you want to make a claim like you invented the question mark and you want to give me $5 to talk about it, we'll talk about it here on the show. So you can always check in on that via super chatter. We appreciate that very much as well. And I'll tell you who else we appreciate. It's our friend Chris Gates, and we'll just talk about him real quick right now, because Chris is the man. You know about his website, chrisgatesfitness.com. Chris, Chris Gates, Gates fitness.com. That's his site, and you should know about Chris by now. He's been sponsoring the live show for a while now, the live Wednesday night show. He's an online fitness coach from Pittsburgh, and he works with people all over the world to create customized fitness and nutrition programs that work. He's also a huge Pitt fan, and he loves supporting the Wednesday live show every week. If you're not already, you can follow Chris on social media, and he does better at social media than I do. I'll tell you that. Because he's got it all covered. Wherever you like to spend your time online, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, even TikTok. Chris is out there doing the TikTok dances, I can only assume. I don't have TikTok, so I just have to assume that Chris is on TikTok, so he must be doing Fortnite dances or something. Go to any of those social medias, search for Chris Gates Fitness, and you'll find him right there. He posts info and tips every single day. His Twitter feed is great. I follow him on Twitter. That's where I see most of my Chris Gates content. And it's great advice and suggestions and all kinds of helpful information for leading a healthy lifestyle. Well, you talk about lifestyle, strength training, weight loss, nutrition, all those things. Chris has good info right there on his social media. It helps you with workouts, diet, and more. So search for Chris Gates Fitness on any social media platform, or go to his website, chrisgatesfitness.com. You can find links to all of it there, as well as his newsletter, and you can sign up for his weekly newsletter that he has, and you can get all kinds of good information on fitness from a Pitt fan. So it's like Pittness, Chris brings the Pittness. It sounds like that's probably something negative. So Chris brings the fitness from a Pitt fan. So go check it out at chrisgatesfitness.com. We're talking about the transfer portal here, and there's a couple comments right off the bat of people talking about the transfer portal and the situation. I was kind of talking about how you really can't predict who's going in. Well, you can predict who's going in to some extent. A guy who's on the bench. I mean, it's not a huge surprise when a guy like Nate Santos goes into the transfer portal, It's not a surprise when Dan Oladapo goes into the transfer portal. I mean, guys who aren't playing, who feel like they could be playing or should be playing, and they want an opportunity to do so, it's understandable. I mean, you kind of predict those. You sort of see it coming a little bit. But there's a lot of unpredictable ones. There's a lot of surprise transfer portal entries guys you don't see coming. And I feel like there's more on the basketball side than there is on the football side. And that might just be anecdotal. That might just be me not, being in the heat of the moment right now with basketball transfer portal news and action, and not thinking about as much about the football side. But it really feels like anyone's, I mean, obviously they are all free to go anytime they choose, but it really feels like anyone possibly could go. And I think coaches really do have to take that approach, and I think most of them have taken that approach that just, I have no idea. Don't know who's going to be on the roster. Hope we have these 5 guys or these 7 guys, but I have no idea if that's going to come to pass or not. And so some of the comments kind of right off the bat were about that. Drew Turak says it's the Wild West and I love it. Anthony Tennyson says it's free agency at its best in college basketball. And you guys are right. I mean, it is free agency. I mean, at least for one turn, you can go transfer for free. And I don't know if I agree that it's entirely the Wild West. I'll tell you the way it's the Wild West. And maybe this is what it means anyway, is that it's just, at least on the NIL side, it's a new frontier that hasn't necessarily been civilized yet. And by that I don't mean they haven't found ways to restrict it, but regulations will be helpful. Regulations would be good. And if you can make it into something sort of, create a system of some kind, it's probably a good thing. As far as players moving around, I mean, yeah, it kind of is free agency. I don't feel like it's as much of the wild, wild west. I know coaches are complaining, oh, there's tampering. They're out there tampering. There's so many of them are tampering. Well, you put 100 coaches in the room, and you tell them all to stand up, and you say, anybody who has never broken any of the rules, sit down. You got very little need for chairs, okay? I don't want to hear about the tampering. Everybody's doing whatever they can to get all the best players on their roster, and that's the simple reality of it. And I don't mean that as a shot at any one particular coach or program or anything like that. It's just everybody has to do whatever they can to stay ahead of the curve. Everyone has to do whatever they can to try to win games. And the best way to win games is to have the best players. You can be the smartest coach in the world, but if your players aren't good, you're probably not going to win all the games. Everybody needs the best players they can get, and they're going to do whatever they can to get those players. Now, within reason, and there are certain lines that I think some programs don't cross. I think there are some coaches who don't go quite as far as others. But I don't want to hear about like the cheating and this and that. It's really about player movement. And I said this on the message board the other day. We were having a conversation about transfers, and somebody said, hey, they just need to remove that one-time free transfer. It's just not, that's creating so much of the problem. Well, the reality is you're not going to make rules that restrict player movement. You may not open up more avenues for player movement. You may not make it looser, but you're not gonna put that back. You're not gonna pull back on that one. Or if you are, it's going to be really hard. You're going to face a lot of challenges on a lot of fronts when you try to make a move that restricts player movement. Now, you may choose to do everything you can to fight everything in your power to not take the next step, which would be unlimited free transfers. You could, I think you could stay at the one-time free transfer and not push it too much further, but you're not going to walk it back. What's done is done, and whatever. Pick your cliche here. You're not going to put the toothpaste back in the tube. You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. You're not going to close that door. You're not going to close that box. It's open, and it's happening. What you're going to find as time goes on and NIL develops, and the transfer portal continues to exist, you're probably going to end up in some sort of contractual situation, which likely makes the most sense, of signing a guy to a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 year contract. And that'll be really, really interesting when that happens, because you'll effectively, you'll remove whatever sham of amateurism still exists, or whatever thin veil of amateurism still exists, and you'll move fully to an employer-employee relationship, which, is not all roses. Employer-employee relationship not only establishes the student athlete as a full-time employee of the university with all the benefits that come with it, but it also establishes an employer. And I think you find that there probably are some benefits to amateurism as it relates to college sports. There are some benefits for the student athletes in terms of not being an employee, largely not being able to be fired, although contracts would do something about that. I remember years ago a coach saying to me, like, okay, these guys want to be treated like employees, fine, we'll treat them like employees. And if they're not performing, we'll fire them. We won't commit to them for 4 years. We will fire them when they're not high enough on the depth chart, or they're not helping out, or they're not doing their part or contributing or whatever. And so that's a little bit of a downside. But I think if you get into a contractual, situation, if you move into an environment where you're signing contracts between the player and the school, keeps the kid out of school for at least 2 years or 3 years, you have an opt-out clause, you have buyouts, and what's the one where it automatically adds on an extra year? The school has a fourth year option, or the player has an option for a fourth year or something like that. Then it'll be a different kind of situation. It'll be different than it is now. And I don't know. I wonder if you get into trades. Could you have trades in college football? I don't know. I don't know where it all goes. I don't know how far it all goes, but I do know you're not going to make any moves toward restricting player movement. I think what's done so far is done, and you're not going to walk much of that back. And understand this, and this is the last thing, and this is, I've said this before, and I just said it to a neighbor of mine. He knows I cover Pitt, cover college sports. He's a casual sports fan. He's a Pittsburgh sports fan, more of a fan of the pro teams. Passing interest in college. When Pitt won the ACC championship 2 years ago, he was really excited about it. This Pitt basketball team, he got interested in it. And he happened to say to me the other day, he was like, what's this portal I keep hearing about? What is this? What is the portal? I don't get it. And I said, well, basically what that is, the portal is a way for players to make themselves available as a transfer. And I've said this before, and I think it's important to keep in mind, when we talk about the transfer portal, understand what it truly is and what the transfer portal truly does. And to understand it, you need the context of what life was like before there was a transfer portal. Because before there was a transfer portal, schools could restrict the transfer destinations. Okay, do you remember this? You had to be released to a certain number of schools. You would not be released to this school or that school. And if you went to that school, you couldn't be on scholarship for a year or something like that. And so you'd have some things like, well, we're not going to release you to anybody in our conference. We're not going to release you to anybody on our future schedule for the next 3 years. And then usually Pitt would throw in like West Virginia and Penn State just to, I don't know why. Russell Shell was restricted from Penn State or West Virginia. I think he ended up going to UCLA for a year and then going to West Virginia when he transferred. But schools could kind of control that and restrict your movement. We will not release you to these schools. And they would put it on paper. They would put it in writing. And the transfer portal removed that. The transfer portal created true freedom of movement, where once you were in, your name was in there for all coaches to see. Your contact info was in there for coaches to see. Coaches could find you. Coaches could reach out to you. Coaches could establish that contact. That's what the transfer portal is. That's what it does and did. And when you hear people use it as a dirty word, oh, the transfer portal, it's ruining college. All it did was take some of that power away from the schools. And honestly, why should the schools have that power anyway? Why should the schools have ever been able to restrict, where you're trying to go? And there would be, some that had nothing to do with competitive reasons. Well, we're not releasing you to Arizona because we believe they tampered. Get over yourself. Kid wants to go, let him go. And if he wants to go to UCLA, or he wants to go to Texas, or he wants to go to South Florida, or he wants to go to North Carolina, let him go. It's not, I think that was And that was probably what scared the coaches and the schools the most about the transfer portal is they were losing that power. It was slipping away. And that's what the transfer portal ultimately did, is it created a freedom of movement that the players did not have, the student athletes did not have previously. So always keep that in mind when you hear somebody say transfer portal, it's ruining college sports. No, all it did was just take some of the power away from the schools and the coaches and give a little bit more freedom to the student athletes. By not, and there's the other half of it too, of the one-time free transfer. Okay, so it became more appealing to transfer because you wouldn't have to sit out for a year that first time you transfer. Those two things in conjunction, removing the restrictions where you could have freedom of movement and go to any school you want, and then go, the fact that you could go there and play right away. That's what came together to create this environment. And then you sprinkle on a little dash of NIL and woo, things get wild. All right, let's get back to comments and questions because I went a little bit long on that particular discussion and that particular, not rant, but just, yeah. I think about that stuff a lot and what it means and what it really means. Drew Turek points out Pitt lost Jake Pursuti today. Yeah, Jake Pursuti was a behind-the-scenes guy. He wasn't a full-time assistant coach at Pitt. He was a staffer. I forget what his title was. It might have been video or scouting or player development. But, I mean, he was big in finding guys in the transfer portal. He was very active in finding guys in the transfer portal. He was, one of those guys for Pitt who was back there scouring the transfer portal to try and find transfer options. He had a big hand in Greg Elliott coming to Pitt because he had been with Elliott at Marquette. And I think he was generally respected around the program. He's going to Buffalo to be a full-time assistant coach, which is an opportunity that none of these guys are going to pass up. Anybody who's not a full-time assistant, anybody who's not Tim O'Toole or Milan Brown or Jason Capel, those guys are going to go. Anybody else on the staff, and there's a lot of them. They've built out the support staff at Pitt quite a bit over the last couple of years. If Gilbert Brown or somebody gets an opportunity to be a full-time assistant coach, he's going to go be a full-time assistant coach. It makes the most sense. And that was the opportunity that came for Jake Pursuti. So good luck to him at Buffalo. And I think he seems like a pretty smart guy who knows the game and probably will do a good job there. William Richter says, "Good evening, Chris. H2P, so excited to see who else Pitt gets. I have a feeling we're going to get a few other nice pieces. Jeff has now earned my trust as well as Heather Lyke." Yeah. I think Jeff Capel earned a lot of people's trust with the success he had this season, but also with the roster construction. I guess this is probably an interesting, William, I think you're kind of getting at this, and I think this is something that's going to be interesting to follow and watch this offseason. So, like, the reaction to Zach Austin, right? Maybe if it was a year ago, people would have been excited about Zach Austin. So, wow, look at this guy, 6'7" wing from High Point. He was the leading rebounder 2 years ago. He's the leader in three-point shots 2 years ago. He's got some real bounce. He's explosive. He can cut to the basket. He can make some shots from outside. He's a good rebounder, decent defender. Seems like a pretty good op. Maybe people would have said that. I don't know. Or maybe people would have said, seriously, we're taking, Big South honorable mentions. We're taking High Point guys. This is who we're bringing into Pitt. I'm not sure, but I wonder if because of the success that Capel had bringing in Nellie Cummings, Greg Elliott, and Blake Hinson as transfers to this team, and the way roster construction was such a key to the team's success this past season, I wonder if Capel earned, I almost said bought, but it's really a matter of earning some extra sort of credit or some extra respect for his ability to build a roster. Because, to be honest, after the first few years, there were some real questions about roster management. When we saw, sort of year after year implosions on and off the court and culture issues and chemistry problems. And there were these questions about, can Jeff Capel really manage a roster? Can he build and manage a roster? This past season, that was, like I said, a huge piece of the success was the roster building and the roster management that Jeff Capel did. And so I wonder if, there's a little more hype about Zach Austin or Ishmael Leggett from Rhode Island who's visiting this coming weekend. I wonder if there's a little more hype about those guys because Capel gets a little bit more credit, a little bit more benefit of the doubt than he did a year ago after showing some real kind of prowess at putting a roster together. I wonder. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is as Pitt adds more guys. They have 3 more spots to fill after Zach Austin committed yesterday. I guess it was. Was it yesterday? Tuesday? Yeah, I think it was. I lose track of my days so often. Let's see. We have a super chatter here. Byron Fleck. Byron, you're super chatter, but I'm looking for your comment. Looks like a mic drop. Well, Byron, I'll keep an eye out for your comment. I don't know if here, Byron, you have a question. It says, with NIL, are reporters drilling down to find out what Pitt and the Alliance 412 collective are offering any particular recruits and transfers? Seems essential today. No, reporting on NIL deals is a little bit tricky. I mean, they're not made public. First of all, I think sometimes you get little whispers here and there about things, but it's hard to really kind of get the details of it. You hear sort of broad numbers. Well, so-and-so got X amount to go there. So-and-so is getting X amount to be there. But nothing really specific. I get the sense, as it specifically relates to Pitt and Alliance 412, the collective that's trying to work on NIL, work in the world of NIL and with Pitt's interest in mind. I get the sense that the efforts are competitive. That they're trying. They're working quite hard to try to be competitive in the world of NIL when it comes to recruits and to transfers. It's an element. It's a factor in all of these situations that we're reading about, recruits and transfers. I mean, it's a factor, and I think it's had a big effect on some significant players that Pitt has gotten and some significant players that Pitt has missed on. I think NIL has been a factor. I think you could probably make a case that Pitt's basketball season this past year looks very different without some strong NIL efforts on Pitt's behalf. That probably doesn't really include Jeff Capel or the coaching staff, but it's relevant. It's a factor. Now, what are the exact numbers and things like that? I don't know, but it's in play. Pitt is doing what they can, and when I say Pitt is doing what they can to be competitive in NIL, what I really mean is people operating on Pitt's behalf are doing what they can to make Pitt competitive in the NIL world, because there's only so much that Pitt can do. I mean, Pitt can't really facilitate these things. They can't set these things up. They can't really have an active hand in it. It has to happen sort of outside Pitt with third parties like Alliance 412. And then you get into, I think, some interesting situations. You see that Syracuse has apparently decided not to interact with their top NIL guy. Maybe they have another plan. I don't know. I don't think you can completely shut it out, because you need it to be competitive in this landscape with recruits and transfers. And if you want to win, you need those recruits and transfers. And if you're going to get those guys, NIL is going to be a factor. Let's see. Scrolling in here. Brock Madonic says, will you guys have any follow-up with how Jaquay Jackson's visit went this week, and what are Pitt's chances? I don't have a really good sense there. Jaquay Jackson, when he first got his offer from Pitt, I had some good contact with him. Haven't had a whole lot since then. I imagine his phone and his direct messages and texts and all those things are blowing up, so we haven't heard a whole lot. It's obviously good that he's been at Pitt. He was there for a visit this week. He's a transfer wide receiver from Cal U. In case you missed that, I think he was at Sarah Catholic or someplace out of high school. Really kind of grew and developed into an impact player at Cal, and now Pitt's trying to get him. But a lot of schools all over the country are trying to get him. It's certainly a positive that he was here earlier this week, either Monday or Tuesday. I don't know exactly which day he was there, but took a picture in a Pitt uniform, so he's got that, on his social media. it's a positive, but I don't have a clear picture on where he stands with on where Pitt stands with him at this point. That's why I didn't get a chance to answer your question on the board, Brock, because I don't have an answer just yet. Josh Newark says, is PJ Philip O'Brien getting pressed at safety because the backup is outplaying him, or if coaches decided they can't trust O'Brien not to make silly mistakes? He had a ton last year in his limited snaps. So PJ O'Brien, Philip O'Brien, I think he's going by Philip this year. Went by PJ in the past. I think he's going by Philip this year. I sort of viewed him. I think I talked about this on one of the morning pits this week, but I viewed PJ O'Brien, Philip O'Brien, as sort of the lead guy, the penciled in starter at field safety coming into into spring camp. I thought he would be the guy. I thought he would replace Eric Hallett, and he would be the one to take over that job. I mean, he was the backup last year, and it just sort of made sense. But as spring camp has gone along, it's become pretty clear that he's not the only one in that competition. Stephon Hall, the redshirt sophomore, who I think is the guy you were referring to, Josh, has really been pushing him. And even, some people I've talked to who've watched practice have seen Hall working ahead of O'Brien. Stephon Hall has always been a guy that's intrigued me. I've always thought he's really interesting. Coming out of Central Valley. He was in that 2021 recruiting class with Elliott Donald and Dorian Ford and Nikai Johnson. It was like, wow, they got these three big defensive linemen from the Whippeal. And they also got this guy from Central Valley. I don't really know anything about him. But he was this big athletic safety, really a playmaker for Central Valley, and just kind of slid under the radar. I've often said him and Donovan McMillan were in the same recruiting class coming out of the Whippeal, and I wasn't always convinced that McMillan was the better prospect. Well, I shouldn't say I wasn't. There were people I talked to who said, Steph Hall is a better prospect than McMillan. I said, really? I mean, McMillan's got all these offers. They're like, yeah, for whatever reason, Steph Hall, he's just sliding under the radar, and he's got the potential to be every bit the player McMillan is, or even better. And so it's interesting to see those two on the same team, potentially lining up next to each other, with McMillan working at the boundary safety and Hall working at the field safety. So he's always been a guy that's been really interesting to me, but he hasn't really gotten on the field much. He was hurt, I feel like, early in his career. Maybe his freshman year he was hurt, so last year was the first time he really saw any playing time. But he's apparently been really good this spring. One of the best players, one of the best players at that position this spring. And he's giving Philip O'Brien everything he can handle in a position battle. Are the coaches playing it out like that because Steph Hall is outplaying O'Brien? Or are they concerned about O'Brien and his composure on the field? To your question, Josh. I really think it's about who's playing. They certainly didn't like some of the penalties that PJ O'Brien took last year. They didn't like, some of the, an unsportsmanlike conduct or an illegal block in the back or just lack of focus, lack of composure penalties. There's some penalties that Panarduzzi will live with, mostly defensive pass interference. He'll live with some of those things. Holding, sometimes he's not okay with it. He's going to yell at the officials about it, but you know what I mean. He can't handle lack of focus penalties like offsides or false starts or illegal motions or things like that. And he can't handle lack of composure penalties. When you make a dumb mistake like a targeting, although targeting even he kind of, he sort of, looks the other way on targeting because he thinks all of those are good hits and nobody should get kicked out unless it was the other team. But, blocking the back, unsportsmanlike conduct, taunting, things like that. He's going to yell at the officials, but he's going to be pretty mad if you did it too. And PJ O'Brien seemed to have a, propensity for doing that. Are they pushing Steph Hall ahead in this competition or, pushing him up in the competition because they're concerned about whether or not they can trust O'Brien? I don't think so. I think Steph Hall has played himself into this spot. I think Steph Hall is a big athletic safety with, worlds of potential. I heard this about him last year too. And I think he's finally getting a chance to show it, and he's impressing. So I don't think that position battle is settled. If they had to play a game tomorrow, I imagine Philip O'Brien will be the starter at field safety. But Steph Hall is going to be there. He's going to play a lot. He's going to, potentially rotate and maybe even win the starting job. Josh Newark says, I love stadium conspiracy talk. Look, here's what I have to say. Okay. And I'll go deeper on this on the Morning Pit tomorrow when we have, on Thursday, I should say, when we have the mailbag edition and somebody asks about stadiums. Here's my thing, okay? They're spending, we keep seeing this number because they just approved it, $240 million on the Victory Heights project, right? $240 million. And that's how much they're saying they're going to spend. If you've had construction done at your house or if you've had construction done at your house or had a contractor in your house or even near your house anytime in the forever, right? You know that if they tell you it's going to cost $240, you'll be lucky to keep it under $300, right? You know, it's probably going to be $275 or $260 or something. So when they tell you that this Victory Heights project is going to cost $240 million, do you really think it's going to come in at $240 million? It's probably going to be more. So even let's just call it $250, or even let's just call it $240. Who cares? That's still a ton of money. $240 million that somebody's paying for. I don't know who. Somebody's paying for it. So $240 million, and you're going to, on top of that, pay the going rate for a stadium is in a dense, tightly packed urban area. What do you think the going rate is? 400, 500 million? I mean, till you get done with like grading the land and making it all work, and water and sewer and all the other things you're gonna have to do just to get the place ready to build a stadium. 500 million? Let's be gracious and call it 350. Let's say 350. 360. Let's call it 360. That makes the math easy. All right, let's say somehow they get off cheap and they spend $360 million on a football stadium in Oakland. You are now on the hook for 2 athletics facilities totaling $600 million. Can anyone tell me where that money's coming from? How is Pitt going to raise $600 million to pay for these 2 things? And they'll raise some. I mean, particularly if it was for a football football stadium, they would raise some. But $600 million. I have a hard time seeing it. I have an even harder time justifying it. $600 million for athletics facilities? You can be a university, and university leadership that is strongly behind athletics and fully supportive of athletics, and still balk a little bit at spending $600 million on new facilities. Just don't know. Just don't know about that. And that's, not to mention, like, where's everybody going to park and how are they all going to get? I mean, it's, to me, I'm skeptical, I guess. But some people are not. I am. Let's see. Extra Fancy Long Grain says, any whispers on if any of the graduating guys are looking to Europe to explore professional careers? No, I haven't heard anything like that. I mean, Jamarius Burton is playing in that Portland Invitational. Nelly Cummings just signed with an agent of some kind. I think they're going to take their chances in the NBA first and go from there. If Europe is what it ends up needing to be, then Europe is what it is. But I think they're going to try at least to make it in the NBA first. All right, trying to scroll through here, see what you guys have to say. It's Willett Harris with all of his I don't even know. Like, you guys just need a separate chat room sometimes, I think. A Hendy 30 says, love the hat, Chris. Hey, I appreciate that. Like my Pirates hat. My yellow, And that's not just because the Pirates are doing well. It's just because I'm wearing a hat. Let's see. Here, Willett Harris says, I don't follow why bringing in guys from High Point is a good thing. It kind of isn't. Well, So the first thing I would say is there's good players everywhere. I mean, I think you're bringing a guy from High Point to play up in the ACC, but last year they brought a guy from Colgate to play up in the ACC. Last year they brought a guy from Marquette to play up in the ACC, and last year they brought a guy who hadn't played basketball in 2 years up to play in the ACC. Although the last time he played, he was in the SEC, so maybe that doesn't count. But it worked out okay. They brought a guy up from junior college to play in the ACC, and all of this seemed to work out pretty well, I would say. So, there's talent everywhere, and maybe this is part of the reason that there's a heavier transfer market in basketball than there is in football, is because there are players who can play. There are players who are currently at lower levels who can play at the higher levels, and they know it and they show it regularly, and so they go out looking for those opportunities. That's what Nelly Cummings did. That's what Greg Elliott did. That's what Zach Austin has done. That's what Ishmael Leggett has done. That's what all these guys have done. And so, I think for the most part, college basketball fans have come to understand that they kind of have to move past getting hung up in, what level the guy was playing at and just look at the guy. And I think when you look at Zach Austin, it's pretty intriguing, as a 6'7" wing, a guy who can rebound, a guy who can shoot from outside, a guy who can cut to the basket, play some decent defense, has a lot of hop, freak athlete is how he's been described to me. So I think there's a lot to like. And the thing I keep saying, I said this a lot on the Morning Pitt today as we talked about Zach Austin transferring to Pitt. The thing that really stands out to me with him is that they don't really have a guy like him. They don't really have a guy who plays the way that Zach Austin did. I kind of said that maybe he could be a taller version of the idealized version of Nate Santos. Like what we all hoped Nate Santos would become based on what he did this past season and his reputation as a shooter. I think we all hoped Nate Santos would be a certain type of player, or believed he could be. Zach Austin looks like he is that guy, but just a couple inches taller. And I say that, and I think that's, again, that's unique. That's not something that they really had last year, and certainly not something that they look like they were going to have this year. And so Austin fills a hole that, I shouldn't even say fills a hole, because it's not really something they're trying to replace from a year ago. It's a different kind of element, a different kind of player that they're bringing onto the roster. Let's see. A Hendy 30 has a good question about the spring game. Before I talk to you about the spring game, though, I have to tell you real quick about Draft 412. We talked about this last week. Draft 412 is, it's all 412 centric draft coverage, and they're hosting an event the first night of the draft at Stage AE alongside the Jerome Bettis The Bus Stops Here Foundation. What night is that? What night is the first night of the draft? Why don't I know this off the top of my head? Here, April, was it 27th? Yes, April 27th at Stage AE. Travis Marzina of 105.9 The X, ex-Steeler great Merrill Hodge, who will provide live commentary during the draft. And part of the proceeds are going to benefit the Jerome Bettis Stops Here Foundation. Current list of sponsors include iHeartRadio, Caliente Pizza, Fanatics, Bet Rivers, Permanis, Condado Tacos, Burgatory Shorties, Three Rivers Karting, Eaton Park, and many more. I'm going to be there at the event on April 27th at Stage AE during the draft to talk about Kalijah Cansey and any of the other Pitt guys who have pro aspirations and pro dreams might get drafted. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a party where we're all going to hang out and watch the first round of the draft together at Stage AE. It's a cool venue, cool event, should be a lot of fun. Put it on your calendar. Stage AE, April 27th. Draft 412. I'll have more details as we get closer, but mark that. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow. Wow, it's coming up fast. So Draft 412 event at Stage AE. Mark that down. You want to be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. A Hendy 30 says, what is different about the spring game this year? Why no draft? So I hope that we're going to find out the format of the draft, or of the spring game tomorrow, kind of what the coaches plan to do, how they plan to split up the players. In the past, as you know, for the past 8 years, they've done a draft for the spring game. The coordinators draft out the coaching staff drafts out the seniors, And then the seniors on the draft day, the Wednesday before the spring game, which would have been today, the seniors sit down and they draft out a blue team and a gold team. They would do it like each round was a position. So let's say gold team won the coin toss and they picked first. They would draft, I think Bengali Kamara would have been the first pick. So they would take Bengali Kamara, and then the blue team would take, they would be drafting all the star linebackers. And so they would draft until they got all the star linebackers done, and then it would be the blue team's turn, and they would draft, Ryan Baer. And then they would draft all the offensive tackles, and they would take all those guys. And so they would go position by position until they'd taken all the players off the board, and they filled out the roster or filled out the rosters for the two teams, and then those two teams would face each other in the spring game. It was a lot of fun on Wednesday. It was a really fun event to go to the draft and see these guys pick each other and watch the strategy, and they would really get into it. The seniors were really into it as they sat down at the tables and went over who they were going to pick and when they wanted to open this position or do that position, or they don't need this, they don't need that. So it was a lot of fun on Wednesday. Not so much fun on Saturday. I counted up over the last 4 spring games, there were 9 offensive touchdowns scored. And that includes one where the final score was 10-7, and I think the only touchdown was a Dane Jackson pick 6. That was 18 or something like that. It was a mess. It hasn't been a good, compelling product pretty much since the draft format started. And that's not to say that the spring game was always really exciting before that, but it created all kinds of problems. You get these mismatched rosters, particularly the offensive lines would be all mismatched, and the quarterbacks didn't have any time, the whistles were blowing fast, and it just, you didn't have good matchups. Wow, they have a huge advantage at this position, huge advantage at that position, and it wasn't a good product. And so Pat Narduzzi said on Tuesday that they want to try to maybe create some better matchups, not necessarily for the entertainment value, but just to get better work out of the spring game. They want to create better matchups. They want to maybe have more of a hand. The coaches have more of a hand in picking the matchups and selecting who's on which team, who's going against who. And so I don't know what that's going to look like. He didn't really get into the details of how they're going to do it. He said they hadn't really decided yet. I mean, you could go just straight offense versus defense. And, you can have a scoring system. They do that in the scrimmages. Offense faces the defense, and there's a scoring system where the defense gets points for this or that, and the offense gets points for this or that, first downs and all those things, 3 and outs and everything. And then you tally up the points, and you see who wins at the end. You could also split them up and, first team offense and second team defense versus first team defense and second team offense. You could do that as well. I wouldn't be surprised if what we get, and we'll find out, like I say, tomorrow. We'll find out on Thursday. I wouldn't be surprised if what we get is some version of that second one that I said, where it's, Narduzzi and the staff pretty much put the players onto teams, blue team and gold team, and kind of pair them up that way. And try to create some balanced rosters, try to create some balanced matchups. The first team offensive line on one team and the first team defensive line on the other team. So you get some competition, some real kind of competitive back and forth, some good matchups, and something people will actually want to watch, potentially even some scoring. God forbid. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things to watch is, can this offense do anything? How does Phil Dracovic look when he's throwing? How does Christian Baer look? How does Nate Arnell and Ty Diefenbach look? How do these receivers look? Can any of them do anything? Can any of them catch the ball? Can any of them make plays? Because that position might be the one I'm most concerned about this offseason. I might be more concerned about wide receiver than any other spot on the roster. It's just, it doesn't feel particularly deep. It doesn't feel particularly experienced. It doesn't feel like there's all that much talent there. And then I say that as someone who is very high on Konate Mumfield. I continue to be high on Konate Mumfield. I think Bub Means is a freak athlete who, if he could just, I think he has all the potential in the world to be a playmaker. I really don't know anything about any of the other guys beyond them. They're going to have to rely on some freshmen coming in, and Dejon Reynolds to transfer. I think they're going to have to try and get another transfer, at wide receiver. like Jaquay Jackson that we talked about from Cal U. I just don't have. I'm not high on that group right now, and you would like to see them do something in the spring game, just to give a little bit of encouragement to make people feel at least a little bit optimistic about where that unit is going in 2023. Brock Madonic says, do you expect any more visitors this weekend? Yeah, I mean, they'll have a ton of recruits there. We don't have a whole list just yet, but we'll have, a pretty long list, I think, from the game on Saturday. The weather looks great. It's going to be a great day to have guys on campus for visits. And I think they'll have a lot of recruits. I think they'll have a lot of recruits visiting Acrisure Stadium. It's a good day to have recruits come around. So we'll have all the coverage from the spring game on Saturday and throughout the weekend. Let's see. Trying to scroll through here and see what's going on. What all the comments are. Anthony Tennyson says, is the question for you, Chris, who do you think when is the backup quarterback? Who do I think is the backup quarterback? I think Christian Veilleux is the backup. Oh, are you saying that the question is not about the starting quarterback? That the question now is trying to figure out who the backup will be. I think Christian Veilleux will be the backup quarterback this year. No disrespect to Nate Yarnell. He's got more experience in the offense, but I think Veilleux is probably viewed as being the more talented quarterback. And so I think that's who they'll go with if they need to have someone replace Phil Dracovic, either in the event of a blowout, poor play, or injury. I think he'll be the guy. I think Nate Yarnell should get his shot. I really do. I think he should get an opportunity. I think he showed some flashes last year in that Western Michigan game. I think he's got, obviously the size. I think he's got a good arm, and he's got a little bit of mobility, and he's been in the offense for a year or two. He's been learning this offense, and he's played it. He's run it, and he's got experience. He was the number 2 in El Paso, so he has even more reps than he would have had as the number 3 all that time. But I just kind of feel like he's probably going to be relegated to number 3 status again this year, unfortunately. I think the plan was to bring Phil Dracovic in to be the starting quarterback, Veilleux to be the backup, and then Veilleux becomes the starter after Dracovic leaves in a year. I think that was the plan. And Nate Yarnell can fight his way up that depth chart. I just think it's going to be tough for him to do. Danny says, do you have an early Pitt football record prediction? That's tough, Danny. It really is tough because I'm sure I'll have one by the end of August. I just don't know what to expect out of the offense. I don't know what to expect out of Phil Dracovic in this offense. And it's Phil Dracovic, and it's the wide receivers. I don't know what to expect. The defense, they're replacing 6 starters. And they're replacing them with a lot of guys who maybe haven't played all that much. And yet I'm still cautiously optimistic about that side of the ball. I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be fine. They may have some rough patches early in the season like Bengali Kamara had last year. But I think by the end of the year, Javon McIntyre and Steph Hall or P.J. O'Brien and Deion Hayes and Bam Brima and Sam Okunlola and Sean Fitzsimmons and all these young guys are going to be making an impact on defense. I think they're all going to be playing at a high level because I think they've recruited really well. I think we've all agreed that Pitt has recruited well on defense over the years. And rightfully so. I don't think that opinion is false. This is going to be one of the years where they show it by how they're able to reload rather than rebuild, particularly along the defensive line and in the secondary. And they have 2 open defensive end starting positions, and they have 2 open safety starting positions. That's 4 open jobs they have to fill at some of the positions where they've recruited probably the best of any on the team. And I think it'll show this year. I think the recruiting, I think the evaluation, I think the development will show when those guys go out and play really well and help kind of carry the momentum of Pitt's defense forward and keep Pitt as one of the better defenses in the ACC. I wonder if it'll take a little time to get going, which is not ideal since they play like 3 Power 5 teams in the first month of the season. But even if it does, I think they'll settle in and be pretty good by the end of the year. Question is, can the offense score enough? Even if the defense is playing well, can the offense score enough to win games? Or are they going to have games where they only score like 19 points or 17 points? Because that's not going to cut it. You can have a good defensive game and still give up 3 touchdowns. You can have a good defensive game and still give up 20 points. So if you're scoring 17, that's not good enough. And so that's going to come down to Phil Dracovic. It's going to come down to those wide receivers. I think the running backs are fine. I think the running backs will be good. I think Pitt will be able to establish a running game. I think they'll be good. Ronnie Hammond, Sebo Flemister, Derek Davis, TJ Harbison, Daniel Carter, all these guys. I think they'll be good. I think the offensive line is going to be really good. Tight ends will be fine if you actually throw to them. Quarterback and receivers. And until I really know or have a more concrete opinion of what the quarterback and receivers are going to be able to do, it's hard for me to sit here and give a record prediction because that's ultimately where the season is going to hinge, is on those 2 positions. Let's see. Will says wide receiver coach was the one position that was unstable over the past 4 to 5 years, and it shows. Hopefully Underwood stabilizes that spot and develops these guys. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that, too. I mean, they went from Kevin Sherman to, I think he was here until 2018. He was one of Pat Narduzzi's first hires in 2015, so he was here for 4 seasons. And then they had Chris Beatty for 2 years, 19 and 20. Brendan Marion, of course, for 2021. And then Taekwon Underwood this past year. So, over the course of 3 seasons, they had 3 receiver coaches, and that is some instability. And then you have Jordan Addison transfers, and Jalen Barton and Jaden Bradley transfer. Will Gibson leaves, and I mean, I don't know if Gibson or Barton or whoever would have been good or not, but I'm just talking about like why Shockey Jacques Louis transferred. They've had some of their recruiting classes wiped out. And now they find themselves needing to take, they took 4 wide receivers in the 2023 recruiting class. I think they wanted to, as we talked about on the message boards, restabilize that position group, restabilize that room a little bit with a foundation of high school players that they can bring in and coach and develop and have for a few years. So you're not looking at a situation like you are right now where Kanate Mumfield, transfer, Bub Means, transfer, Dejon Reynolds, transfer. Your top 3 receivers in spring camp are all transfers. You are going to rely on transfers to some extent. You are going to bring in guys from other programs and bring in guys from the transfer portal. That's part of it. But not all of your guys. You need some foundation of high school players at all positions, I would say. You need some foundation of high school players, guys that you've recruited out of high school and developed. And Pitt doesn't have that right now at wide receiver. I think they're trying to reestablish it by taking such a big class in this 2023 class. And I wouldn't be surprised if they try and take a bunch in 24 as well. But they don't have it right now. And that gives me some concerns. Let's see. There's so many comments from Lat Harris that I'm missing... missing other people's remarks. But either way, we're coming up to the end of the hour anyway, so I appreciate everybody who did jump into the chat screen. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We appreciate that for sure. We appreciate everybody who is in the chat today, even you, Willat, even with your nonsense or whatever you're getting into. But we appreciate everybody who watches the video or listens to the podcast and joins the chat every week. We do this every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. Hope you've had a great week so far. We'll be back tomorrow morning with another morning pit, 2 more morning pits for the week, tomorrow and Friday. And you find them all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So Thanks again for tuning in. Hope you have a great night and great week. And we will talk to you next week, next Wednesday night for the live Panther-Lair Show. But before that, we'll talk to you right here every morning for the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.